Okay, so we're in chapter 3 now, perceptions of self and others in interpersonal communication. This chapter is split up into 2 sections. It used to be 2 separate chapters. The first was self and then the second was perception. And now they've combined them, but I think it's useful to go ahead and just focus on the self. So first, let's talk about self-concept. And sometimes these 3 terms get used interchangeably, and they're actually quite different. So first what we have is self-concept, and that's the way you see yourself. The second is self-awareness, your insight into who you really are. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What do you know about yourself? And then last but not least is self-esteem, and that's the value you place on yourself, or how important you feel yourself to be. So keep those 3 things kind of separate in your mind, and especially when you're doing your assignments, keep them separate. They are not interchangeable. So first we're looking at self-concept, and what we want to ask ourselves is, where does our self-concept develop from? Well, there's 4 sources, and the first source is others' images of you. We call this the looking glass theory, and that means that how we go about discovering who we are, how friendly we are, how assertive we are, we look at how the people we interact with reflect ourselves back at us. And I know that sounds confusing, but the way that I treat my spouse is going to be, it's going to have an impact on how he responds to me, and then how he responds to me is going to let me learn a little bit about who I truly am. How I interact with my children. When I'm interacting with them, I'm going to get, in some ways, a reflection back on who I am or who they think I am, and that's going to help me figure out, okay, who am I and what kind of person am I? The same applies to my friends. When I interact with my friends, they're going to give me an image of myself back as a reflection. And so they're going to respond differently. Different friends will respond differently to me. So to one friend, I may think I'm this person. To another friend, I may be this person. So my self-concept can actually change depending on who I'm interacting with. Think about how wonderful your boyfriend or girlfriend thinks you are and how good you feel when you're around them. Well, that's because the projection of you that they're giving back to you is a very positive one. On the flip side, sometimes you may go to work and you interact with a coworker and you think, I'm not this bad of a guy, or I'm not this difficult of a woman. Well, really all that's happening is the image that's being reflected back to you you don't like, and for whatever reason the interaction that you have with this other person is giving you an image back that you're not particularly fond of. And so you have to sort out, is that truly who I am, or am I just having a difficult time communicating with this person? We also engage in social comparisons, and this is what your discussion board asks for this week, is for you to evaluate your social comparisons. And I think that most people think that we should not compare ourselves to others. We're individuals, and it's not at all helpful to compare ourselves to others. And I think that that's not necessarily true. It can be true, but it's not necessarily true. So the first thing is, let's talk about what an upward social comparison is. And what that means is, I have a master's degree in communication. So if I was going to engage in an upward social comparison, what I would do is I would think of a colleague I have that has their PhD. And I would compare either, let's say I would compare my teaching with their teaching. And I may say, well, gosh, you know, they seem to have a little bit more insight into what activities are helpful for students to grasp communication. And that must be something they learned while they were getting their PhD training. So let's pretend that that's all true. And so that upward social comparison can either do one of 2 things for me. One, I can say, I'm such an idiot compared to that person. I just have a master's degree. I mean, I suck at this. I don't even know why I'm doing it. Or what I can do is say, you know, I think I may talk to that person and find out what techniques I might be able to use that I'm currently not using in my class to make it better. So I don't necessarily have to go get a PhD, but I can use that person to actually help make my classes better. So there's a positive and a negative side to that upward social comparison. Now, downward comparisons, I think, are more difficult to have a positive and a negative side to them. I think a downward comparison oftentimes makes us grateful. So if I see somebody who maybe is close to, let's say, 50 years old, and they don't own a car and they don't have a house of their own, let's say they live with family members because they can't afford their own home, I may be grateful for the fact that I have a house and I have a car. However, if I use a downward social comparison to just say what a loser that person is, I'm so much better than they are, well, that's actually going to negatively affect my self-concept, because eventually I'm going to realize that that's really kind of a selfish attitude and I'm not quite the nice, kind person that I thought I was. Now, if you want to be a jerk and that's your goal, well, then that downward comparison would obviously help you, and you would just reinforce your self-concept that being a jerk is fun, and that's exactly who you want to be, and so it's working. But that's probably not going to be very helpful to, let's say, your self-esteem. So the next is cultural teachings. What does the culture say that I have to be, or what should I be? And that's also not just about beliefs, values, and attitudes, but also about my success. And so what we have to look at is, for me, is women typically, their success is in their children. And what their children do, that's typically defines whether or not a mom is successful. So if your children's on the varsity football team, or if your child's a great dancer, or if your child's a great soccer player, then you're a very good mother, or you've done something to make them this way. And that doesn't necessarily help me because both of my boys are disabled. So for me, if I just draw my worth from what they can and cannot do physically, then the cultural teaching I would learn would be, oh, well, I guess that I'm not very important because I don't have my kid in these sports and they can't be successful in those arenas. So really, I'm not that successful as a mother. But instead what I could do is say, well, that's not true. They're a kind person. They believe in giving back to other people. They're very helpful and funny, and they like to make sure that people are okay. And so that, to me, now that cultural teaching of really raising a well-rounded individual is much more important than what type of sports team that they're on. But cultural teachings do tell me that it does matter what my children become in terms of my effectiveness as a parent. And the same applies to men. I don't think it just applies to moms. And then last but not least is going to be self-evaluations. And so how do I interpret and evaluate my own behavior? If I believe that lying is wrong, and then all of a sudden I lie to somebody, that's going to negatively affect my self-concept, because I'm going to start to believe that maybe I am, in fact, a liar, and that's who I am. The next thing we're going to look at is self-awareness, and this is really asking you, are you aware of who you are? Do you know who you are? And how in depth, or to what depth, do you know yourself? So we look at the Ch3 model, and some people call it the Ch3 window. That's what your textbook calls it. But it is a model for understanding self-awareness. So there's 4 aspects: open, blind, hidden, and unknown. And I think it's most helpful if we just go to this video clip. Hopefully it'll work right here and bring this up. And if you do that, you'll find out more about the Ch3 window.